gonna take all of us to heal this world. It's gonna take all of us.
Good morning and welcome back to the heart of COP28. Day 2 promises to be nothing short of historic, as we've got an exciting lineup for you. And we're not just talking about the climate commitments and the changes, we're also talking about technology and youth. And today we're honored to have King Charles make his very first address as he takes center stage for the very first time as reigning monarch. We also have the grand final of the Polar Race for Good, with schools participating all the way from Greenland to Antarctica, all in order to preserve Antarctica, led by the incredible Linda Cruz. And we also want to bring the voice of the youth into the conversation. Each day we're going to take 3 questions from Slido, and it's going to help shape our show and give you a voice as well. So what are you waiting for? Send your questions in. Let's get started. So we all know the youth are both creative and inspiring. Today we're going to hear from a youth activist in Singapore who's bringing color into climate action.
My name is Sadia from Nigeria, and I'm reporting for Youth4Planet. And please, can I know your name?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Chiren. I'm based in Singapore, and I am an environmentalist, a youth activist, and also an illustrator on social media, where I use comics and illustrations to talk about all things climate change in the hope of making the issue less scary for people. And I'm here at COP today to tell people what's happening on the ground so that people don't feel left behind when all these conversations move, because the more we leave people behind, the more they realize that they cannot connect with the entire issue.
Beautiful. Is this your first COP?
So this is my second COP. I was there in Sharm el-Sheikh last year. I think I'm a little bit more prepared this year, I like to think. So I'm very excited to be here.
Beautiful. I have a question for you. What are your hope? What do you hope for COP28? What are you hope?
I think my hope for COP28 is that because this is a very big one for the global stocktake, right? Which is almost like a health checkup for where we're at and to see where we're going next. It's almost like this is the report that everyone's going to get and say, what's next? Are we doing enough? And my only hope is we all see the dire need to do more. It may be a wake-up call, and I just hope that it doesn't take another 28 years for us to think about doing things and taking action anymore.
I agree. You're from Singapore, right? What is Singapore doing for climate change? Like in your country, what are you doing for climate change?
I think Singapore, because we're an island nation, we are going to deal with a lot of the impacts of climate change. So I do think that Singapore as a country is really putting a lot of effort into mitigating and also adapting to the impacts of climate change. As part of, I guess because we're in the tropical region in Singapore, the impacts of heat is very real. And I'm constantly talking about if this heat gets worse or if rain gets more erratic, even our living conditions and our quality of life is going to change. So yeah, I mean, if people are dealing with the heat in Dubai now, I'm like, okay, it's only going to get worse if we don't do anything about it.
As a youth activist, how is youth activism impact climate change? What do you think?
I think, so someone told me this before, where the reason she works with youths is because, for one, youths are people who, when they look at a problem, they don't think, oh, we can't do this because of what? We can't do this because of what? Young people will look at a problem and go, why can't we do this? And I think that kind of curiosity and urgency is what is missing from a lot of global action. And I think young people has the creativity, the drive, and the energy to say, I don't want to live like this anymore. Things need to change. So I'm very glad that more young people are coming to COP, because no decision without us, right?
That's the point. That's the point. I always have a saying that youth are the backbone of every society, and which without them, I don't think there is gonna be a way forward for all situations, regardless. That's very beautiful. I want to know, how is Singapore engaging youth in climate action, climate justice, and overall?
I think this year, Singapore did bring a very big youth delegation to COP, and I thought that was such an amazing thing to do, because they are supporting so many more young people to experience this, to understand this. Because if you're following this from back home, and I've been following this for a few years, you don't really get what's going on until you come here and you're like, oh my gosh, all these things are happening. So I think the fact that almost about 35 of us are here this year, I don't think it's something that we've done before, and I really appreciate all the support that we've been getting.
What are the things that, as someone from Singapore, what are the things that Singapore is doing in climate action?
I think for a country that is so small, and also we are limited in the natural resources that we have, a lot of our creativity and innovation needs to come with the way that we are building infrastructure. So for example, to ensure that we are secure on our water supply, we are recycling water, we are doing all sorts of desalination in order to make sure that Singaporeans get water to drink, live and work. So I thought that was very cool. We're also trying to put solar panels on almost every surface that we can think of, I think. And that's because we don't have large amount of land to build solar panels. So we need to put it on buildings, on rooftops to figure that out. Because we are an island nation, we're also looking at a lot of coastal adaptation. And as someone who has grown up hearing all these things and seeing all these things happen, and I feel that as a young person, the next 30 years is going to be, I'm going to be living through the next 30 years. So seeing all these things happen makes me think like, oh my gosh, there's so much that we have done and now need to do when it comes to thinking about when we want to live in the climate, I guess, in a climate changed world. What does that look like? And we're starting to see that change. So Singapore has done a lot in the past to overcome some of these national constraints. Now it's almost like the second phase of what we have to do next. So yeah, it's interesting to see.
That's interesting. So regarding this, how is climate impacting youth in Singapore? How is it impacting Singapore as a whole, as a nation, as a country?
Yeah, I think because we're in Southeast Asia, we're going to be a region that is very vulnerable to climate impacts. And we have been seeing this. We've had a lot of scientists in Singapore working on the data, trying to model what's going to happen to Singapore when these things happen. We've seen things like, certain areas in our country are going to be flooded more often than not. And those are things that, when scientists tell us this and they model these scenarios, in my head it's like, oh my gosh, this might happen to me in my lifetime. So because of that and dealing with the heat, we now have a lot of measures to deal with heat. We're also in a period of El Nino, so it's just going to be a lot hotter than normal. And to me, it's, feeling this impacts now already scares me. So I don't know what that's going to look like in the next few years.
That's terrible. Exactly. So from your point of view, how do you see the importance of youth in climate action or climate activity as a youth activist?
Yeah.
How important is youth in the call for climate action?
I think youths have to be almost like that alarm for the rest of the we have to be at the forefront, because if people making decisions now are making decisions for me 30 years later, then I want to know, okay, what are you doing and do I get a say in that? Because maybe the person making that decision might not be around at that time. So in my head, it's always like, how can we be making good decisions for the future generations? And when we say that, you sometimes don't realize that you are the future generation. So I'm always thinking about, okay, am I going to get housing? And if I get a house, is it going to flood? And how am I going to deal with the rising cost, the rising sea level, and rising everything? So I feel that if youth are not at the forefront, then we are going to be the most impacted by what decisions they're making today.
Beautiful. From your points, as a youth, using your activism for youth and everything, what do you hope to achieve at the end of COP28?
At the end of COP28, I hope that more people realize how important such conferences are. And for me, I use art to talk about climate change. I am also hoping that more people see the importance of science communications and what that can do to change minds of people when it comes to, even just using less plastic or changing the way that they use electricity and energy. The more people understand why, they're more likely to do it for a long time.
So what is your at the end, what's your message to youth? What is your message to the world leaders? What do you have? What do you have in you
Okay.
coming here? What do you have to say to them?
What I have to say is there is really no time to wait.
Exactly.
There is no time to wait. I think that we all, whether we like it or not, we all need to take action. And it's almost like this is the call. We are all here. If you need to make the collaborations happen, let's make it happen in the next 2 weeks to get things done.
I read and I've heard that faraway places like Antarctica and North Polar have an impact on Singapore. So, what are your views? What are your perception? What do you think about the whole stuff going in those places?
I feel that for me, living in a very tropical Singapore, you don't necessarily always see what the impacts of Antarctica and all these polar regions having an impact on our country. We actually recently had a scientific expedition to Antarctica, and we've had professors on that expedition just trying to understand what the impact looks like and making that really just relevant to us back home. And I think the fact that we have such expertise in Singapore wanting to figure that out helps us all better understand that things far away does have an impact on us. It's not something that we can be like, oh, it's over there, it's not our problem. And yeah, I think the fact that we are going to know this, we are better able to prepare for what's to come in the next few years. And I think that informs a lot of policy decision to be like, are we going to build seawalls? Are we going to build coastal adaptation? What are we going to do now that we know that information? Because you can't run away from that data anymore. Yeah.
So what happened overnight on the Loss and Damages Roundtable? Let's hear from our youth reporters.
Yesterday, which was the first day at COP28, we had an interesting conversation with Mrs. Roberts, who is the head of Loss and Damage Collaboration, situated in London. And it was something which was quite interesting.
This COP is the first global stocktake. We are expecting the outcome of the first global stocktake of the Paris Agreement, which is meant to assess the progress and the purpose of the Paris Agreement. So the global goals on mitigation, adaptation. We also expect an outcome on loss and damage. So because I work on loss and damage, we see loss and damage, the impacts of climate change that are not avoided, as being a framework for the global stocktake. So we see mitigations, we need to scale up mitigation to limit global average warming to 1.5 degrees, phase out fossil fuels, to avert future loss and damage, minimize loss and damage through adaptation, through scaled up finance for adaptation. The global goal on adaptation needs to be operationalized in a way that is fit for purpose for developing countries. And then we need to address loss and damage. So we need to operationalize the fund here in Dubai. We need to fully operationalize the Santiago network. We need to inscribe responsibilities for developed countries to pay for loss and damage finance, and we need to meet the needs on the ground. So this is an opportunity to do all of that. So that's why it's an important COP.
Thank you, David. And yes, I did follow the fallout of the meeting. And one of the things that really interested me is that it was a truly historical moment. We're looking at over 400 or relatively $400 billion for the loss and damage fund, and that is a lot of money, especially for developing countries who have suffered and who are really suffering from the climate crisis as of now. Do you have any experiences to share in that regard?
Yeah, I have experience to share. For the last 30 years, developing countries have been fighting for the loss and damage fund to come into existence. Now we see the historical prioriters of the missions have now pledged. And to give an example, German has pledged over $100 million US. US has pledged $17 million. United Arab Emirates has also pledged, and we are very happy to see that the Loss and Damage Fund is put into existence. Now it is time to see that the communities affected by the climate change impacts, communities at the front line of climate impacts, are now going to start adapting and mitigating, and so that we can also build resilience into these communities. So the Loss and Damage Fund, I see it is now high time to see that it's put into existence, and which the world leaders have done at the start of COP28. So I also want to know the communities, for example, in Africa, the country where you come from, what will be the role, because even the youth have been agitating for this loss and damage. So if you give the youth perspective on it.
Yes, speaking on the devastation of the climate crisis going on in Africa, let me talk about Nigeria, for instance. Nigeria has seen massive flooding, devastating effects on the environment. Land use is really at a critical point at this time. So we have shortage of agricultural products. It's affecting the economy of the country. So that is just talking about Nigeria, just one country in Africa. So many countries are facing the fallouts of the climate crisis, and I think that this achievement, of the Loss and Damage Fund is going to go a long way. It's going to give all of us hope of a better future in Africa, a sustainable future, and I'm truly happy about this.
Maybe to add on that, the role of the youth. Many organizations like Youth4Planet, we need to act now. It's high time. So they have brought up a number of slogans at different climate conferences, not only at COP28, the activism which has been happening online and physically, to see that the Loss and Damage Fund is talked about. Remember at COP27 in Egypt, so the loss and damage came out, but it was not pledged or it was not put into existence. Now the funds have come. It's high time we put it into consideration and we do what is right in order to lessen the climate change impacts. Remember, the frontline communities who are affected by the climate change impacts are the ones who are suffering more: the youth, the mothers in the rural communities in Africa, and also other developing countries like in Asia and also South America. So the loss and damage is critical for this, and for the interviews which yesterday, the engagements we had from the leader of loss and damage collaboration, who is in London, it was something which was interesting to see that they came knowing that they have to fight for this to happen, and which has started happening at COP, and we think we shall have a successful conference of parties this year. After 30 years of engagement, now we see the fund is out.
You're correct with the operationalization of the fund. I think a lot of young people are looking forward to things that they can do in this regard, because it has created opportunities for vulnerable communities, like you pointed out. And I think it's also pertinent to note that a lot of these communities that are suffering from the climate crisis are vulnerable financially. They do not have the financial capacity to mitigate the climate crisis that they are facing. So it is a huge win, not just globally, but for Africa as well.
I think we have won. And remember, we don't have time. We're at COP. And if pledges have started on the first day, and some of the countries and nations, the highest polluters, are doing something, I see we don't have time. They have acted, and let us continue with amplifying the voices of the youth, the voices of climate activists, the voices of climate leaders, the voices of the local communities, of the mothers, of the youth in different developing countries, to see that this loss and damage, a strategy can be created so that it can be, a number of climate action solutions can be implemented on ground and by different governments, NGOs, and everyone. Thank you.
The Loss and Damage Fund is a fund created to mitigate the fallouts of the climate crisis, and it's specifically created with vulnerable countries in mind. Can I start over again? I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. The Loss and Damage Fund was created to mitigate the climate crisis, to especially cater to countries that are vulnerable financially. And though that vulnerability needs to still be specified, that is what it was created for. So we have countries like the US, which is a superpower, and Germany, and also the UAE. They came forward strongly to contribute to the funds, with Germany at $100 million, and the UAE $100 million as well. However, the US contributed only 17 million, but it was still something. Okay, It's day 2 at COP28, and we have behind us our Creative Velo, and we are getting ready for our live broadcast from Greenland to Antarctica. We're so super excited. We have so much to showcase, and we're looking forward to it. Stay tuned.
So what is a Creative Velo? No, it's not an ice cream brand. It's a creative mobile climate program pedaling around Europe and India. Let's check it out. So King Charles took center stage earlier today and made his first official address. Let's hear what he had to say and what our youth reporters thought about it.
Please welcome a true champion of the environment, His Majesty, King Charles III.
Your Highness, Secretary General, Your Majesties, Your Royal Highnesses, Presidents, Prime Ministers, Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan for his warm invitation to speak to you at the opening of COP28. 8 years ago, I was most touched to be asked to speak at the opening of COP21 in Paris, which of course culminated in the Paris Agreement, a landmark moment of hope and optimism when nations put differences to one side for the common good. I pray with all my heart that COP28 will be another critical turning point towards genuine transformational action at a time when already, as scientists have been warning for so long, we are seeing alarming tipping points being reached. I've spent a large proportion of my life trying to warn of the existential threats facing us over global warming, over climate change and biodiversity loss. But I was not alone. For instance, Sheikh Mohammed's dear father, Sheikh Zayed, was advocating for clean energy at a time even before the United Arab Emirates as such came into being. All these decades later, and despite all the attention, there is 30% more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere now than there was back then, and almost 40% more methane. Some important progress has been made, but it worries me greatly that we remain so dreadfully far off track, as the Global Stocktake report demonstrates so graphically. The dangers are no longer distant risks. I have seen across the Commonwealth and beyond countless communities which are unable to withstand repeated shocks, whose lives and livelihoods are laid waste by climate change. Surely, real action is required to stem the growing toll of its most vulnerable victims. Repeated cyclones batter vulnerable island nations like Vanuatu and Dominica. India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan have been experiencing unprecedented floods, and East Africa is suffering a decades-long drought. This past summer, in common with Spain, Greece, the United States, and many other countries, Canada experienced its most severe wildfire season on record, with 18.5 million hectares of land burned, causing terrible loss of life and property, and of course, releasing enormous amounts of greenhouse gases that contribute to dangerous feedback loops to which climate scientists have been alerting us for decades. As I've tried to say on many occasions, unless we rapidly repair and restore nature's unique economy based on harmony and balance, which is our ultimate sustainer, our own economy and survivability will be imperiled.
COP28 is underway in Dubai, and today we were privileged to have King Charles to address the world at the World Climate Summit here at COP28. And he said that the world does not belong to us, and this is what was one of his statements. And as youth, we have to see that how do we take this speech of King Charles? And he mentioned a number of issues during this COP. And I would love to engage with fellow youth at COP28. And what did King Charles mean during this COP?
Well, for me personally, I would say that he was calling for accountability, that world leaders need to come together and do something about the crisis as it stands. You know, we need to work towards building a world where there is zero carbon, you know, and that's what it really is about, you know, accountability. I think that's what he meant. And another thing he said, which I really liked, is that he said years from now, our children are not going to ask what we said. So it's not necessarily just talking, you know, at the conference. It's not just about talking, but putting up action, you know, including, we shouldn't leave as though the things that we're doing today have zero consequences. You know, he added that they wouldn't ask what we said, they would ask what we did. You know, they would wonder, okay, what did we do about the things that we talked about? How did we take into account, you know, all the actions that we need to put in place to create a better and safer future for them? So these are some of the things that were discussed. You want to add something to that, Sadia?
One thing that is so exciting about this whole COP28 is the fact that having King Charles for the first time as his first climate action as a king, or a climate talk as a king, is one big hope for the call for climate action. And I think from the statement he made, from what generally his statement, it shows that there is a very big hope to achieve the 1.5 goal that we are all aiming at. So I would say, like, basically that's the point for now. The hope we've all been waiting for, the hope we've all been calling for, is actually right here to start.
Well, that's a wrap on day 2 of COP28. It's amazing to see how the youth are getting so involved and how funds are finally starting to get committed to the right places. But the question is, will we hit the goals of the Paris Accord by 2030? And will we get back to 1.5? Stay tuned for tomorrow's show.
It's gonna take all the